When a Pentagon lawyer struggles to say whether journalists have the right to criticize the government, that's not a hearing, that's a warning. Elizabeth Warren just exposed how far Trump's Pentagon is willing to go to control the truth.
Plans. Mr. Young, you were acting general counsel for DOD for most of 2025, and now you're nominated to be the Army's top lawyer. So let me ask you, Mr. Young, do you consider your oath to the Constitution to include the First Amendment?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Thank you. We need independent journalists at DOD now more than ever. President Trump has ignored locally elected leaders to deploy military forces to Los Angeles, to D.C., to Chicago, and he's told generals he wants the military to use American cities as, quote, training grounds, close quote, and handle the, quote, enemy from within. Now, this is extremely dangerous, and we need independent journalists reporting the truth, not just whatever spin Pete Hegseth wants to put on it. So, Mr. Young, would it be consistent with the First Amendment for DOD to revoke press credentials of a reporter for publishing a story that was critical of the Trump administration?
Senator, we're very cognizant and very conscientious of the First Amendment and the freedom of the press to be able to report as needed. It was my understanding that the policy was designed to inform the members of the press. The ability to access the Pentagon is a bit different than a normal public forum.
Well, I got to stop you right there, Mr. Young. I asked you a very straightforward question. I think you can answer with a yes or no. And that is it consistent with the First Amendment for DOD to revoke press credentials of a reporter just because the reporter published a story that was critical of President Trump? That should be an easy one for a lawyer who has served as you have for many years.
Yes, Senator, I would say it would be consistent with the First Amendment if the basis was that the person published information that was not otherwise approved for release by the Department of Defense. They could still be critical. We're not getting into their content, Senator.
Well, are you telling me that the new regime is that Secretary Hegseth will decide what has been released and that reporters can only talk about what the Secretary releases? That's your view of the First Amendment?
No, Senator, I'm not saying that.
Well, then let me ask my question one more time. If a reporter publishes a story critical of the Trump administration, is that grounds for revoking that reporter's press credentials?
No, Senator, it's not.
Great. Okay, hard to get there, but I'm glad we did. Let me ask you one more question, and that is, if the courts rule any of the DOD's press restrictions unconstitutional, will you stand by your oath to the Constitution and tell the military leadership to comply with court orders? Or is your plan to bend a knee to Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth?
Certainly would advise to comply with court orders.
Okay. You know, I appreciate this. Freedom of the press is a core pillar of our democracy, and the public needs to know if sending troops to war under false pretenses or if it's exposing our troops to toxic water. This is a scary moment, but there is power in raising our voices. And that is why Donald Trump and his lackeys at the Pentagon want to shut down reporters and shut down access to the truth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That exchange right there is about far more than a press credential. It's about power. It's about whether Americans will be told what their government wants them to hear, or what's actually happening behind closed doors. When Warren opened that line of questioning, she wasn't just defending journalists. She was defending the public's right to know, the right to see what's being done in their name, with their tax dollars and under their flag. And the way the Pentagon's nominee twisted and dodged those questions tells you everything about the state of transparency under this administration. Here's the background that most viewers never hear. Early this year, the Defense Department quietly issued new press access guidelines. On paper, it looked bureaucratic. In practice, it forced reporters covering the Pentagon to sign a pledge agreeing not to publish any information that hadn't been approved for release, including unclassified material. That's not about national security. That's about narrative control. Think about how dangerous that is. It means if a journalist uncovers mold-ridden military housing, or soldiers poisoned by toxic water, or internal communications showing waste, fraud, or abuse, that story could technically violate the Pentagon's policy. And under these rules, that reporter could lose access, have credentials revoked, and be cut off from sources. That's how you silence oversight without ever passing a law against it. And this is what Warren zeroed in on. She saw the quiet shift from protecting classified information to policing unclassified truth. She forced the nominee to admit that, yes, in theory, he believed it could be constitutional to revoke a journalist's credentials for publishing something the Pentagon hadn't approved. That moment matters because it's the clearest window into a creeping authoritarian mindset. When the government starts deciding what information is acceptable for the public to see, the First Amendment stops being a shield and starts being a slogan. But here's what most people don't realize. The First Amendment doesn't just protect what journalists say. It protects how they gather information. It protects their ability to investigate, to challenge officials, to confront contradictions between what the government says and what the facts show. The framers of the Constitution understood that freedom of the press wasn't about flattery, it was about accountability. Historically, the press has always been a thorn in the side of power, and that's the point. During Vietnam, it was investigative journalists who exposed that the Pentagon had been lying about troop progress. During the Iraq War, reporters revealed the truth about missing weapons of mass destruction. Each time, the public was told that reporters were hurting morale, endangering security, or undermining leadership. But in hindsight, those stories saved lives and forced change. That's what Warren is defending here, the role of the press as a check, not a cheerleader. Now let's look at the legal layer she's getting at. The First Amendment prohibits what's called prior restraint, meaning the government cannot block publication in advance, except in the most extreme national security cases. Yet under this new Pentagon rule, the military could label almost any unflattering information as not approved for release, and then punish the reporter who publishes it. That's not just unconstitutional, it's a chilling effect that makes journalists think twice before telling the truth. And make no mistake, that's the goal. Not to silence every story, but to make journalists hesitate, to make editors doubt whether a scoop is worth the risk, to turn watchdogs into lapdogs. Warren's broader point cuts through all of this. When a government fears accountability, it's the people who lose. Because if the press can't tell us when the Pentagon wastes billions, or when troops are mistreated, or when political appointees misuse power, the public becomes blindfolded, and a blind democracy is a fragile one. What's even more chilling is how this fits into a wider pattern across this administration. We've seen reporters blacklisted for critical coverage, press briefings gutted, agencies ordered not to share data with the public, scientists told not to use the words climate change. All of it adds up to the same strategy: control the narrative, control perception, control power. That's why this hearing matters, because every time a senator like Elizabeth Warren forces a nominee to say, on the record, whether they believe in the First Amendment, she's planting a marker for history. It's accountability in real time. And what we saw from that exchange was a legal mind trying to walk the tightrope between the Constitution and loyalty to Trump's Pentagon. Warren wouldn't let him. She cut through the evasions, the careful phrasing, the bureaucratic smoke, and she made the truth plain. A government that punishes journalists for telling the truth is violating the First Amendment, full stop. This is about more than politics. It's about whether we as a country still believe that the truth belongs to the people, not to whoever's in power. So if you care about democracy, remember this moment. Because every crackdown on the press starts small. It starts with one policy, one denial, one pledge. And if we don't push back, it spreads, quietly, efficiently, until the only voice left is the the official one. And that's why Senator Warren's questioning mattered. She wasn't just grilling a nominee, she was defending a pillar of democracy, the right of the people to know, the right of journalists to ask, the right of truth to exist outside government approval. Because without that, the First Amendment is just words on paper, and power wins by silence. If you believe the free press is worth defending, don't just watch, act. Support independent journalism wherever you can. Share their stories, protect their right to work, and demand transparency from those in power. And if you want to help us keep doing this kind of analysis, breaking down the hearings, exposing the subtext, connecting the dots, support The Liberal Lens on Patreon. Your support keeps us independent, informed, and unafraid to speak the truth. Subscribe, share, and stay engaged. Because democracy doesn't die in darkness, it dies in silence. And the only way to stop that is to keep shining light.